As the war in Russia and Ukraine continues to drag on, now digging deeper into the third year of conflict, there's a big debate going on in the United States, has been for months now, about this $60 billion package that President Biden has been trying to get passed through the Congress, really all the way back to September of last year. It's very, very contentious, lots of domestic politics involved. But the side that's for passing that money has continually just ramrodded into our heads that we have to do this. It's critical. It's important both for Ukraine. It's important for Western democracy, all kinds of really grandiose kind of statements. And we've been not shy about calling a lot of that stuff out. You know, when people make these claims that are not supported by evidence, we often point it out here. And it's not hard to do because there's a lot of it. A lot of people are spreading misinformation, or they just don't know any better, frankly, and they just are told that this is what's working by some alleged experts. And so they, as American policymakers, will then go and say with conviction these same kinds of things. And we call those things out because we're all about the truth here. We're unintimidated and uncompromised no matter who's making these statements. If they're wrong, we're going to call them out. But when we find someone who's right, we want to promote that and allow that as well. So we call balls and strikes here, folks. And when somebody finally fires a fastball right down the middle, we want to call that out too. And there finally has been one, and we'll show some of the details of it here in a minute. But Senator J D Vance has been one of the few and consistent voices that has been saying, this is not going to work. It's not going to matter. He published a piece in the New York Times today, which we'll talk in some detail about in a minute. The math on Ukraine doesn't add up. So he's taken the first shot here at saying, hey, it's not just an emotional issue. And even if somebody wants to say that we ought to help Ukraine and they should win and Russia should lose and all those kinds of statements that people can make, and they're free to come up with whatever opinion they want. But what they're not free to do is to claim that passing that $60 billion is going to make a big difference. Because one of the things you're going to see, and I'm going to show you three examples of, and at least three of what some of the proponents of that are saying, and you'll see a consistent theme through it. Lots of emotional words, no details, because details are everything in this situation. When you're talking about war and peace, you can have emotion, motivation, rallying cries, and leadership and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, if you don't have the weapons, if you don't have the ammunition, and if you don't have the men, all the words fall flat. They don't make any difference because, frankly, a bullet doesn't give a damn about your words. It's going to tear into flesh. If it hits it in a bomb, it's going to destroy whatever it lands on. And the guys that have more of that are the guys that are going to win, no matter who's, quote, morally right or wrong. That's just the grotesque horrible truth of war, and why I'm such an advocate that it be only used in the absolute last case when necessary to defend our people from attack, not just as a policy option or like, yeah, we should do this here. Careless people do that, and millions of people throughout time have died because of it, and hundreds of thousands in this current conflict. We'll get to that in a minute. First of all, let's take a look at some of the key players here on the advocate side of it and what they've been saying. So you can see how this stuff's all going to match up together here. First of all, from February, President Biden emphatically saying, pass that bill.
We have to stand up to Putin and pass the national bipartisan bill, the National Security Bill, supporting Ukraine as they defend themselves against Putin's vicious onslaught. And prove to the world once more, America can be relied on. We stand strong with our allies. We have to remember who we are. We're the United States of America. We keep our commitments. We never walk away from our friends. And we sure as hell don't bow down to Vladimir Putin.
Very emotional, very emphatic about that. No details. Senator Chuck Schumer one-up the president 3 days later after the Senate passed a bill. And of course, you know, until the House passes its version, nothing happens. So it's just a bill. But that didn't keep Senator Schumer from really selling this one.
Today, we witnessed one of the most historic and consequential bills to have ever passed the Senate. It's certainly been years, perhaps decades, since the Senate passed a bill that so greatly impacts not just our national security, not just the security of our allies, but the security of Western democracy.
Man, the security of Western democracy writ large. Wow, that's pretty incredible. He didn't provide a single bit of evidence there about what this money would be used for, how it would do that. And see, that's one of the critical things. That's what's absolutely non negotiable, necessary for the advocates to be able to convey here's what that money is going to buy. Here's what it's going to do. Here's how it's going to change the course on the battlefield. Here's how it's going to negate Russia's advantages and capabilities in X, Y, and Z areas. No one has done that for it. They really like the emotional play here. And it's not just a Democratic issue. Republicans have joined the fray too.
Equipping Ukraine for battlefield success is the surest way to help our friends resolve this war from a position of strength. Backing Ukraine as it degrades our common adversary's military also strengthens America's interests.
Okay, we're not at war against Russia, but this is also a common thing among many on the advocates of supporting Ukraine, is it harms Russia. That's what he said there. It harms our common adversary. Well, Russia doesn't need to be our adversary. We're making it so by all the things we've done. It's more bigger issue than I can go into here on this video here. But as we talk many times, there's a bunch of things that we've done that could have had off ramps years and years ago, or even during the war. We've chosen not to have any of them. So we've maintained this tense relationship that we have here. But the other thing he said, McConnell there in that last part, is at least one thing about what they think the money can do, and that is to help Ukraine negotiate an end to this from a position of strength, the senator said. Okay, here's a problem. We've already been there before. We've had two major opportunities to do exactly that, and we failed to take advantage of them. The first one was the best case we ever had, and that was barely a month into the war in Istanbul, when there was a good shot at ending the war on terms that were unpleasant for Ukraine, but not catastrophic. They would have had to declare neutrality, that they would not come into NATO, but they would have most of the rest of their country free. And the vast majority of the casualties they've suffered and the territory they've already lost would still be theirs to this day had they done it then. But then came the next best chance in November of 2022, when Ukraine had their high water mark. They already were at a position of strength because they had just forced Russia to abandon Kherson City, and they drove Russia out of 6,000 kilometers of territory in the north in Kharkiv. If ever there was going to be a moment to negotiate from a position of strength, that was it. As then chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Milley, said this.
The probability of a Ukrainian military victory, defined as kicking the Russians out of all of Ukraine, to include what they define or what they claim as Crimea, the probability of that happening anytime soon is not high, militarily. Politically, there may be a political solution where politically the Russians withdraw. That's possible. You want to negotiate from a position of strength. Russia right now is on its back. The Russian military is suffering tremendously. Leaders have been, the leadership is really hurting bad. They've lost a lot of casualties, killed and wounded. They've lost, I won't go over exact numbers because they're classified, but they've lost a tremendous amount of their tanks and their infantry fighting vehicles. They've lost a lot of their fourth and fifth generation fighters and helicopters and so on and so forth. The Russian military is really hurting bad. So you want to negotiate at a time when you're at your strength and your opponent is at weakness. And it's possible, maybe, that there'll be a political solution. All I'm saying is there's a possibility for it. That's all I'm saying.
And what he was really saying was, fellas, I know the deal. I understand how combat power is made, and I understand how it's created and how it's expanded. And I have the classified information that I understand where Russia's going and what their capacity is. And I know what Ukraine's going, and I know what their capacity is. And of anybody, he understands that it's men, not money, not machines. That'll come up again to play later. So we should have listened to him, because he knew, and he gave every signal he could not to undercut the president and not to embarrass anybody by saying, this is your moment. And we didn't take it, because we had just had these big successes the Ukraine side had. So all the advocates were now cheerleading even louder. no, now we can drive them all the way out. Now let's do this big offensive. So nobody wanted to say, hey, we're in a position of strength here, but we're going to lose that advantage over time. Instead, they got carried away with emotions and said, yeah, let's keep going here because what we saw here will continue on without evidence, without an understanding of the dynamics of warfare and how it's different from a battle is not a war. There's some major differences, which Billy knew. So he tried to help them out. No one had it. So the idea that now, if we give them $60 billion, that somehow we can get back to a position of strength and then we'll make a negotiated settlement is nonsense. Because human nature being what it is, even in the theoretical possibility that Ukraine could get back on the advantage at some point, they would never stop at that. Then they would again, just like they did in November 2022, they would go, yeah, let's keep going. Let's do it again, even though the fundamentals aren't there. And I specify the theoretical possibility because the practical possibility of ever getting back to that position again for Ukraine in this war are virtually non-existent. As much as you can say in human nature, in human relations where things are improbable and odd things happen, even given that, it's nearly physically impossible for Ukraine to ever get back, even to a position of advantage, much less victory. It's effectively impossible. Now, Gary, if you could put that headline back up there for a second. In today's New York Times, and this is out literally just hours ago, J D Vance says the math on Ukraine doesn't add up. Now, we've had some of his quotes on here before where he said he was not for this. And because this people still keep sticking with the emotional pleas that we played there a minute ago, he wanted to write this out there, I think today, to provide some substance about how it physically isn't going to matter if we pass this $60 billion. Now, if you've been watching Daniel Davis Deep Dive for any amount of time, you already know that. But we're going to see what Senator Vance has provided to show just how it is. Now, one of the first things I want to look at is the Patriot air defense system. Of course, as everybody knows, that's been one of the effective things that we've done, that we've had for a long time. And that Ukraine wanted from the beginning, and it had a lot of success because it genuinely is a good system. But like every system, it's not foolproof, and many of them have been destroyed that we've provided them already. And so President Zelensky just went, I guess, about a week ago and made a pretty bold plea, if not an outright trying to shame the West into saying, hey, give me all your Patriots. I don't care if you need them or not. I don't care if you don't have many of them or not. I want them all. Here's what he said.
Є системи ППО у світі, які можуть допомогти. Потрібна лише політична воля, щоб ці системи були передані Україні. Зараз Петріотам місце саме в Україні, щоб згодом не довелось їх застосовувати щонайменше по всьому східному флангу НАТО.
Okay, just first of all, on the strategic and the tactical and operational issues related to that, that's a pretty arrogant statement to be making, and not one that's going to find very many friends. And you're not going to shame Western leaders into giving you their Patriot systems, because for that to be true, what he claimed there would have to be agreed upon at the end, which was if he doesn't stop here, he's going to keep going west, and you're going to be next, and NATO's going to be next. So a lot better to give them to me now where we can hold him off so that you don't have to use them later. Nobody believes that. None of the leaders believe that. That's why these things aren't coming across there. That's why people aren't willing to give them up. But J.D. Vance shows you even more the reason why we won't give more of them up, much less somebody else, because there's a math problem. Again, if you can pull call that back up here. Here's what he said in that article. The story is the same when we look at other munitions. Take the Patriot missile system, our premier air defense weapon. It is of such importance in this war that the Ukraine's foreign minister has specifically demanded them. That's because in March alone, Russia reportedly launched over 3,000 guided aerial bombs, 600 drones, and 400 missiles at Ukraine. To fend off these attacks, the Ukrainian President Zelensky and others have indicated they need thousands of Patriot interceptors per year. The problem is this: the United States only manufactures 550 every year. If we pass the supplemental aid package currently being considered in Congress, we could potentially increase production to 650. But that's still less than a third of what Ukraine requires. So let that sink in for a second. Our country, at best, produces right now 550 per year interceptors. And these things, if we pass this supplemental, apparently can be added another 100 if we do that. That's all we can produce. Now, you want to take away our air defense weapon systems and give them to Ukraine when it takes usually many interceptors to intercept one enemy aerial bomb or missile. So that's why I said it's literally thousands of them. That's why Zelensky in that clip, he wants all of them. He wants everybody to give him everything he has. I think I saw that they actually did an analysis of what countries have them and how many they have to try and say, yeah, y'all, all of y'all give me everything that you have. But even that's not going to help because Russia has a much bigger supply of precision-guided munitions that they are building and producing on the factory system like crazy. They're continuing to ramp it up. So no matter how many Patriots you give them, number one, if the launchers get hit, there's not that many launchers, and it's a long lead time, years to replace those kinds of losses here. But there's not enough interceptor missiles to continue on, even for an extended period of time, into 2024, even 2025 maybe. You're going to run out of them. And then what? Well, they're in that situation right now. So Vance says that this fundamental supplemental might add 100 to the total that we can even make. And then the question is, are we going to give up our interceptor missiles that we might need in the event that we get stuck into a war anywhere in the Middle East, in Europe itself, in the Indo-Pacific? I think you see where this is going. We're not going to sacrifice our potential to defend our nation if we get into war to throw good money after bad when this war can't be won, nor is anyone else. I would be shocked if you see anybody else give a Patriot interceptors in any large numbers in response to Zelensky's demand there. Okay, then we move on to some different areas here. Now, some say that that to call out or to stop Russia, which McConnell had mentioned there or implied there, that if we don't stop them here, they're coming to get us. And you know, Zelensky said that many times here. But J D Vance answered that actually in a recent interview that he had, where he does that very same thing about any kind of risk to Poland.
First of all, Putin has showed he's much weaker than a lot of people feared. The Ukrainians have fought bravely. They've also stalled Putin at a very small amount of territorial gain relative to the entire country. The idea that he can march to Poland or Berlin is preposterous. And the other thing that this really misses here is we have to remember our NATO allies, with the exception of a few Eastern Europeans, are not carrying their fair share of the burden. Most of them don't even spend 2% of their GDP on defense. If Putin is a threat to Berlin, that means the Germans should be changing something about their defense policy. It doesn't mean we can write indefinite checks to Ukraine.
Yeah, it really doesn't. And that's one of the issues that I've also had about this bill itself, is that there is this implication, and it's on both sides of the Atlantic, that if America doesn't give this $60 billion, then all is lost for Ukraine. And I've often wondered, wait a minute, isn't NATO a 32-member alliance? Where are all these Europeans that are allegedly in the firing line that are so worried about Russia coming across that they can't allow Ukraine to lose? Why can they not come up with $60 billion among them? They have come up with some money, to be sure. I think they're actually debating. I think the last thing they passed was a $50 billion aid package over 4 years. So pretty small numbers on aid. And that's actually mostly to non-military aid to keep the country functioning. And now they're debating $100 billion over 5 years, but that's in the debate stage alone. It's not anything here. But where are their, whether it's the German, the French, the UK, their interceptors from a lot of their systems that they have in aircraft systems, or another $60 billion of their own, of 60 billion euros, whatever they want to do? Why can that not come from that side too? Why is it only the U.S. Congress that can do that? I don't hear any of the advocates answer that question. JD brought it up. It's a very valid point. Next thing he moves on to, though, is what's the actual plan? So you saw that I played at the beginning here, where Biden makes this very emotional plea that we have to give this money to Ukraine. But what's the actual plan? JD brought this up also in a recent interview. He's asking the question, where's this money going?
We are not, as a Republican Party, behind unlimited, unaccounted for aid to Ukraine without any goals in mind, without any sense of where the money is going and what's going to be accomplished if we continue to support Ukraine. So I absolutely think it's a failure of leadership that we've gotten to this point.
That's a fair question. What is this money going to do? Here's what should be the absolute non-negotiable minimum from the president and the administration. Okay, we want $60 billion, and this is exactly what it's going to buy. It's going to allow this and that and the other thing. It's going to support this weapon system, this capability, and those capabilities on the battlefield are going to do X, Y, and Z. And that's going to stop Russia from doing what it's doing because of this. And they explained it. So you say not just what you're going to buy, how many you're going to buy, but what they're going to do on the battlefield and how that those munitions and capabilities counteract what Russia's doing on the offensive right now. And if you can make a rational, logical plan, then I would be willing to consider changing my view if I saw on the ground how that it could actually translate into changing the operational dynamics on the battlefield. There's none of that. They haven't provided any of that at all, only emotional pleas, because what I can see and what I can measure leads to the opposite conclusion, meaning that, JD keeps talking about a math problem over and over, which we see here on this channel. You guys see it too. The numbers just aren't there. Now, what JD's next thing he said in another interview of late is that it's a manpower issue. He said it's not only about money, but it's about the men.
From the perspective of the United States of America, and I represent, I believe, the majority of American public opinion, even though I don't represent the majority of opinion of senators who come to Munich, is that there's no clear endpoint. And fundamentally, the limiting factors for American support of Ukraine, it's not money, it's munitions. America, and this is true, by the way, of Europe too, we don't make enough munitions to support a war in Eastern Europe, a war in the Middle East, and potentially a contingency in East Asia. So the United States is fundamentally limited.
See, that's one of the things I really value and appreciate about Senator Vance. He recognizes that America is a great country and a great power, but it's not unlimited. We can't just do everything that we want because we want. There are limitations what we have to do, and you have to prioritize things, and you have to understand we could potentially be in conflict in the future in the Indo-Pacific, in the Middle East, in Europe, even with us, even though I argue that we should not do any of those things, but sometimes you genuinely can't make a decision. You can't avoid that. That's the reason why I'm an advocate for a very strong, powerful national defense system, but we need to make sure we have resourced and trained and recruited a number of personnel to be able to handle all those things. But even with that, this is a big world. And now then, this is not a unipolar moment. It's not 1991 anymore. There actually is a strong force in Russia, in Europe, and in China, in the Indo-Pacific. And so we have to be prepared to be able to handle things if something unexpected comes up. And that means you better have the resources and the personnel and the training necessary to respond to those. And if you start giving it away to everybody all the time, like Zelensky's demanding, like Netanyahu's demanding in the Middle East, you may find yourself in a world of hurt. And once that happens, you can't undo that. That's a really potential existential problem that you have there. And it's wise not to do that. Getting back to the math problem. Other issue that is often raised up, and I think this $60 billion, they do say that is going to get some of this, but the scale of the issue is the problem. 155 millimeter artillery shells. In the article, the New York Times piece, J D Vance addresses the 155 millimeter issue. Here, if you can bring that up there. He says, consider our ability to produce 155 millimeter artillery shells. Last year, Ukraine's then defense minister assessed that their baseline requirements for these shells is over 4 million per year, but said that they could fire up to 7 million if that many were available. Since the start of the conflict, the United States has gone to great lengths to ramp up production of 155 millimeter shells. We've roughly doubled our capacity and can now produce 360,000 per year, less than a tenth of what Ukraine says it needs. The administration's goal is to get this up to 1.2 million, 30% of what's needed, by the end of 2025. This would cost the American taxpayers dearly while yielding an unpleasantly familiar result, failure abroad. So consider that by the end of 2025, by the end of next year, and we're just in April of 2024, we will then be up to about a quarter of what Ukraine says that it needs. And of course, as I've told you many times, Russia's already beyond that. They're already at around 4 million right now, plus they're getting stuff from North Korea on top of that. They could be between 5 and 6 million by the time this year is over, and it's only going to continue to ratchet up. Meanwhile, everything that we're doing is this minuscule number, which tells you again, even if you pass this bill, even if you pass this aid bill and it's the full 60 billion, I still have significant doubts that it's going to get passed. Lots of issues in the House, which we can talk about another time. But even if they put enough pressure on the House of Representatives and they end up passing the full 60 billion that's asked for, it's minuscule. It's going to change this much. You saw specifically on the Patriots interceptors, maybe 100 more. That's not enough for a couple of months difference. If all of them were given to, and as we also pointed out, that's a risk for us. I'm not sure that we're going to make with 155 millimeter shells. The big casualty producer on the battlefield, it's going to be just a rounding error difference. It's not going to hardly make any difference on the battlefield. So all of these claims that these people keep making, from the president on down, that this is going to be the difference between victory and defeat, are wrong. I won't go so far in this case to say they're lying, because maybe they honestly think it will. Maybe they're just not aware. And I'll open that as a possibility. Or they're just desperate and they think, well, maybe it will. Well, maybe it'll happen. Maybe it'll buy them more time. That is a horrible way to do policy. If that's the case, that in some ways is even worse, because you're gambling with the lives of these people who are dying on a daily basis in Ukraine, in the hopes that all the evidence that you can see, count, and measure aren't going to turn out the way they have through the centuries of warfare. I mean, I think that's close to immoral to do. And yet it seems like that's what we're doing. But talking about immoral, there's one other issue that JD raises here in his article, and that's about where the money is going to go. And as some say, it's not just going to Ukraine, it's coming to us. He writes in here that the proponents of the American aid to Ukraine have argued that our approach has been a boom to our own economy, creating jobs here in the factories that manufacture weapons. But our national security interests can be, and often are, separate from our economic interests. But here's where he says that I agree so wholeheartedly. The notion that we should prolong a bloody and gruesome war because it's been good for American business is grotesque, and I would add immoral. And if you're wondering what he's talking about there, here are two senior State Department officials that are singing that tune in loud and clear. Here, first of all, is the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken.
Virtually all of the security assistance that we've provided to Ukraine, that gets invested right here in the United States. That's where it's spent. This is a win-win for us.
I still just can't get past that. This is a win-win. This war, it's a win-win. It's awesome to be able to do this because we make money. And I really don't know what the other win is. I've never really got that part for sure. But as that picture that Gary tosses up here a lot, when Zelensky came to town in December, December last year, you have all these execs here. They're loving it. Of course, they are all about that issue of good for American business. And there's the recipients of exactly what it is. So as enthusiastic as you heard Antony Blinken was, this is why. This is the guys who are excited about it. But Victoria Nuland, I think, she puts the finer point on it, which makes it even worse.
Our supplemental support will strengthen the Ukraine of today, but also put it on a more sustainable path for tomorrow. And by the way, most of the support we are providing actually goes right back into the U.S. economy and defense industrial base, helping to modernize and scale our own vital defense infrastructure while creating American jobs and economic growth. In fact, the first $75 billion package created good-paying American jobs in at least 40 states across the United States.
So that's your selling point there. We created jobs in 40 states. A lot of people are getting, it's cool. Let's just keep doing it and keep those jobs rolling. Okay, there are better ways to help American economic productivity than just building more bombs and hoping that the war keeps going on so you can make more of them. I think that there's a lot better things that we can do with our money than just do that. And that helps a lot larger segment of our economy. But again, that's something I'll talk about on a different level. But the fact that speech, by the way, at the CSIs that she gave before she left office, was actually an extended period where she was making lots of claims of what this money would do, but it was almost divorced from actual fundamental issues on the ground. It was all categorical things. And like she said there at the beginning of that segment there, this is going to help Ukraine for a long period of time. No, it's not. That's that part where it's just deception, because it's not going to help Ukraine for a long time. It's going to be a small bump in some areas. But as she herself said, most of the money will not go to Ukraine. It will go to American manufacturers. So that's another one of the dirty little secrets here, is that even that $60 billion, which it's hard to say, anything's a lot or a little, because it's always in context of what it's around. But even if it sounds like a lot of money to you, most of it is not going to Ukraine, but it's going to American arms manufacturers. So that's even less of what's actually going to go to help the Ukraine side. This is about what's good for them politically. It's about what's good for manufacturers here. It's not about winning the war here. And that's the last thing I want to really leave you with, is that this is not going to change the outcome of the war. It's not going to help Ukraine. And as John Mearsheimer on our show said yesterday very eloquently, all it's going to do is raise the cost for failure and for defeat. It's going to mean more people die, but it's not going to change the outcome. And that's why we should not do this. Last thing here I want to talk to you about is what JD says we should do. So he doesn't just throw a lot of rocks. He actually puts what is possible. He says, by committing to a defensive strategy, Ukraine can preserve its precious military manpower, stop the bleeding, and provide time for negotiations to commence. But this would require both American and Ukrainian leadership to accept that Mr. Zelensky's stated goals for the war, a return to the 1991 boundaries, are fantastical. And so they are. For all the things we've talked about on this show, all the things we've talked about on previous episodes, scream that in manpower, in ammunition, and in weapon systems, and in training, Ukraine cannot win this war. And in all those categories and more, the Russians have 5 times more man that they can choose from. They're still recruiting 30 to 40,000 per month. So their army is continuing to expand while the Ukraine side is shrinking, because they can't force enough people through mobilization to come to offset the casualties they have. So it's a net loss for them, and it's a net gain for the Russian side, because they suffer a lot of casualties, but they have more men to absorb them. So there's still a net growth. Their industrial capacity, of course, we keep telling you that over and over. Their air power, their bombs, like those we're showing on the screen there right now, new categories of them, and they are devastatingly effective. And even the defenses that Ukraine has dug in now are being destroyed in ways that Ukraine never had a chance to do to the Russian side when they had their offensive. Russia now is, and the risk is growing more possible by the month that the Ukrainian army can one of these days finally crack and break somewhere, and Russia has theater level exploitation forces, because they took the time to train people out of contact, so that now they have entire units fully armed and fully trained that can be rushed into in a moment if they have a penetration somewhere. And who knows whether that's going to happen anytime soon or not. It may not. But what is happening on a daily basis is that the Ukrainian army continues to get obliterated through all of these bombs and aerial strikes and drones and all of the kinds of things that are going along with that. JD Vance is right. There's a math problem. It's manpower, it's munitions, and it's money. All of it is accurate in there. And it is time to stop making policy with emotions and preferences. And I hope more people start to listen to Senator Vance and Senator Paul, who we've had on this show before, who's also of like mind on this, and he has a lot of these same views. Senator Lee also is another one. So there's a number of them. There needs to be a lot more. So one of the things we've been asking a lot here recently, and I'm going to ask again here, take this video clip and start sending it out to everybody you know. Go onto Twitter or any other social media that you have. And when you see people talk about past the $60 billion, give the supplemental, whatever, tag them on this. Say, no, not do it. Here's the reason why. It's very practical and fundamental. This is not just an opinion issue. This is a very fact-based argument. And people need to know it, because the consequences of getting this wrong is not just a bad policy. It's death, unnecessary death for people we claim to care about and want to support the Ukrainian people. Every day that goes on without reaching a negotiated settlement, without even trying to reach a negotiated settlement, means more Afghan men will die, more cities will be destroyed, and more territory will be lost. And that is the hard truth of it. Thank you very much for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to have you here, and we consider it an honor to get to talk to you. We're going to have an intel briefing here. What we've learned this week, we're going to be having, it's kind of a new segment here. We're going to be doing it live here this afternoon at 2 p.m., actually not long from now. So tune back in to see that, and we will see you later on Deep Dive.